Jury deliberations in the criminal trial of Derek Chauvin are currently underway. We don't know how long this will take. It could be only a few more hours. It could be days or weeks. It entirely depends on what the jurors are discussing and what they feel. I think it's fair to point out that politics will play a role in this, and many of the jurors are probably scared that if they say not guilty, they will find themselves on the short end of the stick from these rioters. Most people fear that with a not guilty verdict, the riots will get very bad. If Chauvin is found not guilty on all counts, we'll likely see riots across the country. It's hard to say exactly how bad they will be because perhaps Chauvin will be found not guilty on only a few of the counts, and this may still temper the rage of the far left extremists. But across the country, people are preparing. The governor of Minnesota has declared a state of emergency. Outside police are being brought in. $9 million is being allocated towards security, and everyone knows exactly what's going to happen. No doubt, this is going to impact the jury. Illinois has activated the National Guard. Philadelphia has activated the National Guard. Anti-riot legislation was just signed into law in Florida, and several major metropolitan areas across the country are preparing for mass unrest. The judge refused to sequester the jury, and even now has stated that Maxine Waters, the things she said, may give grounds to the defense for an appeal which could overturn the entire trial. Now, perhaps there are some jurors on principle who don't want to condemn Derek Chauvin without proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Perhaps they're saying to themselves, I won't send a man to prison unless you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But perhaps what the judge just said has made these people feel safer knowing that they can absolve themselves of responsibility, just say Chauvin is guilty on all counts. That way no one burns their house down. And then they're probably thinking the guy will get out on appeal. It's no big deal. I can say what I need to say to protect myself. Perhaps the jury is more concerned with their health and safety than justice. I think it's a fair assessment. I think Americans are particularly self-interested, and many won't stand up for truth and justice in this case. Now, I don't know if Chauvin should be found not guilty on all counts. I certainly think the state hasn't proven their case on most of the counts, but manslaughter may fly. We can only wait and see. For now, we have to contend with the fact that we have a political atmosphere that is charging this trial and pushing it towards a guilty verdict. We've had the mayor of Minneapolis support the extremists. We now have President Joe Biden saying that he wants the right verdict because the evidence is overwhelming. Some are suggesting that's ground for impeachment because he is telling the people of this country to expect the right thing to do is to convict Chauvin. Now, what happens after Joe Biden says that and they don't convict him? What happens when the president of the United States says the right verdict is for this man to go to prison and they say no? Well, then people are going to be mad because if even the president says so, then we must certainly be facing true injustice. And I think it's a strong possibility that's the case. And if it is, following the statements from Biden, it may be worse than we have seen. Let's take a look at what's going on with the security measures and what you can expect from these cities. And then I want to show you what Joe Biden has said, which may make everything worse. But before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to get access to exclusive members-only segments in our members area, segments from the Timcast IRL podcast. We're also going to be expanding into a bunch of new kinds of content, short films, movies, comedy, and a new podcast on paranormal, mysteries, etc. We want to do a whole lot more with timcast.com and make it something bigger than just this show. And with your support, we can start doing cool cultural things that will inspire people and help create a culture of individual thought and people willing to stand up for what they believe in. Also, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's read the first story from the Daily Caller. Governor of Minnesota declares state of emergency. They report Democratic Minnesota Governor Tim Walz declared a state of emergency in counties near Minneapolis and is bringing in police backup and from other states ahead of the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. Numerous sources reported late Monday. The declaration includes a request to bring in state troopers from Ohio and Nebraska, who will be assigned to security missions at key state facilities, Walz said, according to Bring Me the News. Following the death of George Floyd, protests and riots erupted in Minnesota, which resulted in more than 250 buildings being looted or damaged in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and surrounding suburbs. The case against Chauvin went to the jury Monday, and after deliberations and a full day of closing arguments, the final phase of the trial is due to resume Tuesday, Fox reported. Quote, "We can't live like this," Walz said. According to Fox 9, we simply can't. But we can't have thousands of businesses burned and people put at risk. Walz also made a request to the Minnesota legislature to free up emergency funding for extra security, a $9 million boost that the Minnesota Senate passed Monday afternoon, according to Fox 9. Included in the measure is $6.3 million in overtime pay and other costs for Minnesota State Patrol, which have been deployed to the Brooklyn Center for security purposes after the police shooting of Daunte Wright in April. Fox 9 reported the measure needs to pass the state house. Quote, as the world awaits a verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, we need support in our efforts to preserve the First Amendment right of peaceful protests while protecting public safety, Walt said, according to Bring Me the News. The mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul said they wouldn't order curfews for the entire week ahead of the verdict. According to Fox 9, if curfews are set, they will likely be on a day-by-day basis. Minneapolis officials have been preparing security for the Chauvin trial for months. The city spent roughly $645,000 on fences and barriers to protect city buildings and police precincts from potential vandalism and destruction that could have occurred during the trial. Waltz also signed an executive order in February to activate the state's National Guard ahead of the trial. The executive order would also extend into August, when 3 other police officers facing charges in Floyd's death will stand trial. Roughly 24 people across the country were killed as a result of the looting and riots between May and July 2020. I hope you've taken that statement seriously. It's not just about Chauvin. There are other officers involved. That means we may be in for some of the largest and longest riots we've seen. If Chauvin is found to be not guilty on some counts, as long as he is found guilty of manslaughter, then it stands to reason these other officers will face trial as well. We will see more riots, more unrest. It's interesting. The smartest thing the state could have done is just not charge any of the cops and said we declined to prosecute on the grounds that they were doing their job as officers. The riots would have been probably as bad as they were. I couldn't imagine them getting worse, and it would all be over by now. The energy would be long gone. Many of these people believe incorrect things about what happened to George Floyd, so it wouldn't matter whether or not there was a prosecution anyway. Right now, many activists are saying the people will win when the state wins their case, which is the most nonsensical thing to me. It is the state versus Derek Chauvin. The state is scapegoating Chauvin for their programs and their training and their requirements and the things they call on cops to do. If Chauvin wins, then the police and the actions they take are justified in the eyes of the people. And if the state wins, then the state literally still justifies their force because they can always scapegoat the officer. There's no real way the police win because it seems no matter what happens, there's likely going to be riots. Now, I'd like to show you a statement from the mayor of Minneapolis, an extremely irresponsible statement. The Daily Caller reports, quote, regardless of the decision made by the jury, there is one true reality, which is that George Floyd was killed at the hands of the police. That's actually not reality. The defense has actually put it to the jury to give us their verdict. So I think we can only defer to them as they've seen all the evidence. And we don't know what caused the death of George Floyd. Perhaps the jury will find that based on the evidence and expert testimony, Chauvin was the cause of death. They might find that he wasn't, in which case all of the charges are out the window. Interestingly, though, if they find that Chauvin did not kill George Floyd, there still may be the felony assault charge. But I don't even think that one can stand. Felony assault implies that Chauvin was attacking George Floyd when Chauvin was a cop trying to arrest someone who was resisting. If they convict Chauvin on felony assault, I don't know how any officer could do their job, but I have to imagine many of them would just stay anyway. Now, I'll show you what really scares me. It's this statement from Joe Biden. Axios reports, Biden says right verdict in Chauvin trial is overwhelming. President Biden told reporters Tuesday that he's come to know George Floyd's family and that he's praying the verdict is the right verdict in Derek Chauvin's trial as the nation awaits the jury's decision. Why it matters? Officials fear a not guilty decision in the high-profile case could inflame racial tensions and set off a new wave of riots. The jury was sequestered and entered deliberation after closing arguments on Monday. What they're saying, quote, it's overwhelming in my view, Biden said without elaborating. I wouldn't say that unless the jury was sequestered. We know what Joe Biden is saying. I think it's fair to infer. I think it's fair to say, well, I'll put it this way first. He technically didn't say anything. He says, I hope they have the right verdict. Well, the right verdict could be anything. The evidence is overwhelming. Well, the evidence could be any. Is it overwhelming that he's not guilty or guilty? Based on those statements alone, the media is reticent to say that Joe Biden is encouraging a guilty verdict. Considering that he's contacted the family of George Floyd and not the family of Derek Chauvin or friends, then I think it's only fair to say we know what he means in this case. And should there not be a guilty verdict after the statements of Maxine Waters and now Joe Biden, the city is going to burn to the ground, and likely many cities in this country. The statements of Joe Biden following Maxine Waters likely give grounds to the defense, as the judge stated, for an appeal. Now, in that regard, I guess it's fair to say the jury's already sequestered, so maybe Joe Biden wouldn't. But I think they can still point out that politics played a massive role in this. Moving on in the story, they say Philonise Floyd, George Floyd's brother, said on NBC's Today that Biden called him and his family on Monday to let us know he was praying for us and hoping everything would come out to be okay. He knows how it is to lose a family member, and he knows the process of what we're going through. Floyd said, they're a good family and they're calling for peace and tranquility no matter what the verdict is, Biden told reporters about his conversations with the Floyd family. The big picture, according to Axios, Congress and the White House are both bracing for the verdict. At a closed-door meeting last week with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Biden said he was concerned about potential fallout from the trial. Thousands of National Guard troops and law enforcement officers have been on the ground in Minneapolis since March. The D.C. National Guard has been activated, roughly 250 members to support local police in response to the potential First Amendment demonstrations. Sorry. The First Amendment says peaceably assemble. So I'm not entirely convinced deploying the D.C. National Guard is about anything related to the First Amendment. Jim Sciutto tweeted of CNN, you may know him. This is a remarkable statement from a sitting president on a criminal trial currently underway. That I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict. The evidence is overwhelming in my view. Sciutto says also of his call to Floyd's family. He said, I waited until the jury was sequestered and I called. They're a good family. Remarkable is one way to put it. Completely inappropriate is another. But Joe Biden doesn't seem to care. He's playing politics. And I'm not going to play this what about game with Donald Trump. He's not the president anymore. We can criticize Joe Biden now. Caleb Hull tweets, CNN reporter to Psaki just now, quote, yesterday, you said the White House did not want to get ahead of the jury's deliberations. But of course, the jury is deliberating. So what changed? Yeah, good question. What did change? And in this instance, man, my respect to a CNN reporter for challenging the Biden administration in this capacity. They wanted to wait for jury deliberations. They didn't want to get ahead of it. But now Joe Biden is coming out and saying these things. People are going to be expecting a guilty verdict now that the president has made that statement. The evidence is overwhelming. And what are they going to get? We don't know for sure. We don't. But I'll tell you that I'm worried that politics is playing a role in what's happening. After Maxine Waters made her statement, most of you probably know this, National Guard, a security team was fired upon. We now have breaking news that a man has been arrested and charged following the shooting that injured 2 National Guard members in Minneapolis. We don't know that this man is the one who actually shot at the National Guard. He wasn't charged with this, but the vehicle did match the description of the vehicle that fired, according to law enforcement. And the man was found with a gun and there were shell casings in his car. So they think, well, at least I should say, they're making it seem as though this is the case. I'm highlighting this story just to give you the update and let you know that what we're talking about is serious. What's to come in the trial of Derek Chauvin will likely result in riots no matter what happens. And that's why everyone is getting ready. The more extreme instances of security preparedness is these following stories. DC National Guard activates 250 troops ahead of the Chauvin verdict. They say in a statement on Monday, the DC National Guard announced that it would activate approximately 250 personnel to support local law enforcement in response to potential First Amendment demonstrations. The force is approved to support DC and law enforcement as needed. The Guardsmen were specifically requested to assist police with street closures at multiple intersections in order to provide safety in and around pedestrian areas. Quote, at the request of Dr. Rodriguez, director of the DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, the District of Columbia National Guard is in a support role to the Metropolitan Police Department, and we are prepared to help provide a safe environment for our fellow citizens to exercise their First Amendment right. Brigadier General Aaron R. Dean II, the Adjutant General of DC National Guard, said in a statement, this is our home, and we are dedicated to the safety and security of our fellow citizens of the district and their right to safely and peacefully protest. In a letter sent to the DC National Guard on April 8th, Christopher Rodriguez, the director of the DC government's Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, requested that the Guard be activated to help the DC police manage crowds, block vehicles, and at traffic posts and provide a quick response force. Quote, the trial is expected to last 3 to 4 weeks, and there is the potential for First Amendment demonstrations to occur in D.C. in response to the verdict. These demonstrations are congruent with the demonstrations that occurred during 2020, where the district saw a large influx of participants and general disorder and criminal activity, then those are not First Amendment activities. Please be more specific. On Monday, the prosecution and defense delivered their closing arguments. The Hennepin County medical examiner ruled Floyd's death a homicide, but we'll see what the verdict is. Next up, we have Governor Pritzker activating Illinois National Guard Tuesday for Chauvin verdict. Governor J.B. Pritzker is activating the Illinois National Guard Tuesday at the request of the city of Chicago due to the upcoming Chauvin Trial verdict. The governor's office said 125 members of the Illinois National Guard will deploy to Chicago beginning on Tuesday to support the Chicago Police Department as needed. At the request of Mayor Lightfoot, I am activating members of the Illinois National Guard to support the city in keeping our community safe, said Governor J.B. Pritzker. It is critical that those who wish to peacefully protest against the systemic racism and injustice that holds back too many of our communities continue to be able to do so. Members of the Guard and the Illinois State Police will support the city of Chicago's efforts to protect the rights of peaceful protesters and keep our families safe. Governor Pritzker also directed the Illinois State Police to support the Chicago Police Department with additional troopers. The troopers will work closely with Chicago police and other local law enforcement supporting efforts to keep the community safe. Quote, our greatest priority at all times is ensuring the safety and security of the public, said Mayor Lightfoot. While there is no actionable intelligence at the time, we want to be fully prepared out of an abundance of caution. Our city has a long history of peacefully expressing its First Amendment rights, and I encourage residents to exercise their rights to free speech this coming week, thoughtfully, respectfully, and peacefully. Soldiers assigned to this mission are from the Illinois National Guard's 33 Military Police Battalion. These individuals are specially trained in riot control operations. Last summer, 375 Illinois National Guard members were deployed to Chicago during unrest following the death of George Floyd. And we are not done. Next, Pennsylvania National Guard activated as Philly preps for potential unrest ahead of Derek Chauvin murder trial verdict. City leaders outlined plans for increased law enforcement staffing, while Governor Wolf activated more than 1,000 Pennsylvania National Guard to the city in preparation for any potential unrest. Okay, this is a mouthful, my friends, and this is the next big metropolitan area that's activating National Guard. I don't want to just keep saying the same things over and over again, but in this instance, let me just take a break to say, I think this matters. I think it's important you know what's to come. For those of you that are living in metropolitan areas, we are preparing for a hurricane, a figurative hurricane. Illinois, D.C., Pennsylvania, or I should say, the Philadelphia area, and Minnesota are prepared for a major, major emergency. I think, in my personal opinion, there's a strong possibility, I'm trying to be careful here, it will be worse than we saw last year. It's one of the reasons I left Philadelphia. I was in the Philly suburbs on the other side of the bridge, and the rioters crossed the bridge. You may have heard me say something like this for those that have followed my other segments. I don't want to be anywhere near a city. Many people have been warning to stay away from Minnesota and get out of Minneapolis if you can. Those that can't, I hope you're prepared. The Inquirer reports Philadelphia officials and community leaders Friday outlined plans for increased emergency operations and law enforcement staffing, while Governor Tom Wolf activated more than 1,000 Pennsylvania National Guard members to the city in preparation for any unrest following the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis officer. We know about this. At the request of the city, Wolf signed a proclamation of disaster Friday evening, activating the 1,000 plus state guard members to support the current efforts in Philadelphia to protect our beloved neighbors and city. The proclamation is effective for 90 days unless Wolf rescinds or extends it. The activation of the Guard came after city leaders held a news conference Friday, saying they learned from the large-scale racial justice demonstrations and unrest in Philadelphia last spring and have developed a holistic plan to address any aftermath of the landmark Chauvin verdict. Regardless of what may develop, I am confident that our department is prepared for whatever may come our way, said Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, standing in front of the Municipal Services Building, a flashpoint for conflict in 2020. Where the statue of former mayor and police commissioner Frank Rizzo once stood, and where a mural highlighting Black Lives Matter protesters was later installed last year. She said, while we made missteps along the way, we are committed to moving forward in a meaningful and productive manner. I got to highlight that mural and that statue. These politicians are absolutely deferential to the extremists and the rioters who are taking over the justice system. The president himself is essentially calling for no justice to be found. Justice in the trial of Derek Chauvin would be the jury coming to their verdict without interference from politicians, from rioters. But unfortunately, As we've seen all last year, we've lost any semblance of real leadership in this country. Donald Trump had some, I suppose, the willingness to stand up to the riots, to the mobs, to wokeness, to cancel culture. But it wasn't particularly good leadership. He may have done many good things. He may have had better policies than Biden. But now our country is bereft of any true leadership. The Republicans flail and do nothing. They call for censuring Maxine Waters, who has incited insurrection in this country. And mostly they repeatedly defer to the extremists. I can only expect it's going to get bad. Outside of Philadelphia, Utah law enforcement. Activists say protests likely once Chauvin verdict announced. APD, Atlanta, says it's prepared for possible fallout from the Chauvin verdict. Downtown Seattle businesses prepare for possible riots while awaiting Derek Chauvin verdict. Los Angeles braces. LA braces for unrest while awaiting Derek Chauvin verdict. It is happening across this country, and we can only expect it's likely to occur. So what do? Move out of cities? It's the best thing I can say. It's the best advice I can give. And for everyone who's trapped, lock your doors, go to the store now, pick up food and water, and treat this like a hurricane. They'll likely move through suburban areas. They did it last time. They may even threaten residences. We've seen protesters in the Pacific Northwest do just that. So what can we expect and what's the time frame? Let me read a little bit from this NPR News article where they first talk about Chauvin not testifying and what we can expect. Why didn't Chauvin testify, they say? If Chauvin had decided to take the stand, it could have helped present him in a more human light, perhaps by him expressing remorse. Much of what jurors have seen of Chauvin is a man sitting quietly behind a mask in the courtroom or video footage of him kneeling on Floyd. We have not seen any emotion from him, said Mary Moriarty, former chief public defender for Hennepin County, and he may not be capable of that or wanted to do that. Chauvin would have faced considerable risks had he chosen to testify. Under cross-examination, prosecutors would have pressed Chauvin to know what was going through his mind. They also would have walked him and jurors through damaging video. All this would have happened under the scrutiny of cameras and a live stream. This is being beamed all around the world. They say, how will Chauvin's decision not to testify affect the jurors? Chauvin had a constitutional right to remain silent. Cahill will read instructions to the jury, making that clear. Quote, the state must convince you by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of the crime charged. The defendant has no obligation to prove innocence. The defendant has the right not to testify. The right is guaranteed by the federal and state constitutions. You should not draw any inference from the fact that the defendant has not testified in this case. But legal experts say jurors probably want to hear from Chauvin. The typical thinking is if he was innocent, he'd come and tell us that, said Mark Ulcer, a professor at the University of St. Thomas. How long will jury deliberations take? Now, the reason I highlighted those previous portions of this article is just to say there's a strong possibility that the jury actually finds Chauvin guilty for a variety of reasons. Jurors and the media often hold it against people when they don't testify on their own behalf, even though there's a reason why we have the Fifth Amendment. That being said, if there is a guilty verdict, it may not be because of pressure. It may be because they genuinely believe Chauvin overstepped his bounds. The jury is allowed to draw that conclusion. But how long will this take? They say it could be anywhere from several hours to days or even weeks. As the judge said in his parting comments to jurors before closing arguments began, it's up to the jury how long you deliberate, how long you need to come to a unanimous decision on any count. In 2017, jurors deliberated for 5 days before finding St. Anthony police officer Geronimo Yanez not guilty on all charges, second-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm in the fatal shooting of Philando Castile during a traffic stop in Falcon Heights. Jurors previously told the judge they had deadlocked. In 2019, jurors in former Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor's murder trial reached a verdict after about 11 hours of deliberations. He was convicted of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter for killing 911 caller Justine Ruxick. Last year, jurors in Stillwater deliberated for about 7 hours before acquitting Washington County Deputy Brian Crook of manslaughter for shooting Benjamin Evans, 23, an off-duty EMT who had threatened suicide during a 2018 standoff in Lake Elmo. Besides Chauvin, Noor, Yanez, and Crook are the only Minnesota law enforcement officers to have been tried for an on-duty death. Washington County Attorney Pete Orput has charged former Brooklyn Center officer Kim Potter with manslaughter in the April shooting of Dante Wright. Will the jury be sequestered? Yes. So the jurors are sequestered. They say they will be isolated in a hotel while they work towards a verdict. The judge is allowing the jury to view the trial exhibits, including video footage, through a laptop computer and a large monitor, rather than having them return to the courtroom. The jurors will be able to submit questions to the judge by Zoom. Porter said the desire of sequestered jurors to return home to their lives and families can sometimes be a motivating factor in their speed. I think they mean Cahill? Porter was the cop who got arrested, right? I'm sorry. No, that is Porter. Potter was the cop who got arrested. Okay. So this is Porter making the statement. They say, to what extent is the jury aware of the fatal police shooting of Dante Wright? Jurors probably know something about it. They have been told to avoid the news, but the fallout from the Wright killing, including nights of tear gas, curfews, and instances of looting, has again thrust Minnesota into the national spotlight. News of the curfews also went out on cell phone alerts. At least one juror lives in Brooklyn Center, while others have connection to the Minneapolis suburbs, according to Chauvin's attorney. He made an unsuccessful request for sequestration. So I'd like to point out, imagine being a juror in this trial. Imagine, where do you live? Where do you live? Do you live in a big city? Maybe you don't. Maybe you live in a suburb, or maybe you have family who does. When you heard about the riots in New York, Chicago, LA, across this country, didn't you text your loved ones asking them if they were okay and if they had locked their doors and if they were paying attention? You probably did, didn't you? Don't you think the jurors likely were worried? They had to have known riots were happening. It's not about the news. It's about people talking to each other. And I can only imagine they called their family and said, are you okay? I can only imagine their families then said, this city is going to burn. I can only imagine that many of the jurors know they will be targeted and their families will be targeted. I think there's a strong possibility of a guilty verdict on all counts. And I wonder what that means for the police. They have been trying to defund the police and abolish them. Well, short of that working, which it didn't, the next thing you can do is just get all of the cops to walk away. Now, in my opinion, I think the cops should. I think it's a win-win for everybody. The activists don't want cops. The locals don't defend the cops. And if the jury is willing to convict a cop, then y'all need to quit. They say that they're protecting those who are too scared to speak up. Sorry, I'm not a fan of that logic. If the city votes for Kamala and Biden, if Biden says, Chauvin, it's overwhelming, we know what the right verdict is, and he calls the Floyd family, they are against you as police officers. Why are you there? I also think about it this way. Imagine there's like someone doing something, just a random task, and the city votes for this person to stop, and they don't. At a certain point, you need to realize that your own community hates your guts. They're not willing to defend you. Maybe there are people who do like you as an officer. They say, I like the cops, but they don't like you enough to actually say anything or do anything. You have no support. You have very little support. At what point do the police just say, enough, I'm out? Right now, they're bringing in cops from outside jurisdictions. Many of these cops are likely just coming here because it's a paycheck. And therein lies the problem. So long as there are cops who don't care about the community, don't care what people say, it will just keep getting worse. Fine. That means we're going to see way more riots. Now, you could just rip the Band-Aid off and have cops say, I'm not getting involved. I wonder what happens now if these riots erupt. And then one of these cops from Ohio comes in, and then he uses a less lethal weapon, kills a protester. And then they say, we're prosecuting you because you shouldn't have done it. You know what? What do you expect? What do you expect? Imagine running into a burning building. We'll do another burning building analogy. And instead of the fire chief saying, we're going to give you support, they shut the water off while you're in the middle of the burning building, and then they close the door on you. Why would you do it? Look, I get it. It's one thing if you're like, I'm going to run into a burning building to save people. But what happens when the entire system, the residents, the politicians oppose what you are doing as an officer? Oh, sure, behind closed door, they might say, thank you so much for everything you do. And then in public, they'll say, let them burn. So you're going to run into a conflict, into a riot, where you could face life in prison and have everything around you destroyed and your family threatened. For what reason do you take that risk? Guess it's a paycheck. Well, I'll tell you this. If you could see everything they're doing, and you could see that they're willing to sacrifice these officers, and you're willing to defend that, well, then you get what happens. You deserve it. You chose it. If the people of Minneapolis vote for Biden and Kamala, the people who support the rioters, and then their house burns down, they voted for it. Like, how am I going to imagine if someone voted to have like sewage dumped on their lawn. Like literally was like, I demand it happen. Okay, Then when it happens, why would I assume they're upset about it? They're voting for this stuff. They have the police are not wanted in these communities. So then why are they there? Why do they do it? Who are they protecting? When the riots break out, we see the cops defend police departments. That's the stupidest thing ever. You're giving the target for the rioters. You're voted against. I just think it's absurd at this point. I think people don't respect the police and don't respect what they offer the community and what they're doing. And if that's the case, then maybe the cops should just say, y'all are on your own. You know, I know a lot of people are saying, yeah, but there's people here who do support us. Dude, if they're not willing to go outside and march, if they're not willing to even sit on their porch or put a Blue Lives Matter flag up, they're absolutely not willing to do it. Some people are. Well, then, I don't care what they say behind closed doors. They don't support you. I hear from people all the time where they message me saying, I oppose all this wokeness and cancel culture, Tim, but I can't speak up. I'm scared. I'm like, then you don't really oppose it. You just personally don't like it, but you'd prefer it over any real risk to yourself. Nah. With great power comes great responsibility. And that means that any power or any privilege comes with responsibility. You want a safe community? Then you have a responsibility to make sure that you help the police. If you don't like the police, you have a responsibility to speak up. I'll tell you this, at the very least, the left is not backing down. The right and those who support cops ain't doing anything in these places for the most part. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The verdict come any moment. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.